Communications Digital Media Speaker Series. The purpose of this series is to engage our entire community on contemporary topics and hear from professionals who are enhancing methods of storytelling across disciplines. Melissa Ludtke is kicking off our series this academic year. So to introduce Melissa is the treasurer of Endicott's chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists and a student in my digital media law and ethics class, Julia Keegan.
Hi everyone. Melissa Ludtke grew up a Red Sox fan, being raised in Massachusetts. She took her passion for sports professionally, writing for ABC Sports, Sports Illustrated, and Time magazine. Because of her work, young female journalists who report of sports don't have to worry about being denied or turned away just based on their gender. Melissa is writing a book called Locker Room Talk, A Woman's Struggle to Get Inside, about her legal action during the 1970s women's movement to educate the next generation of women like her about their rights as women and as journalists. In my digital media law and ethics class, we learned about Miss Melissa Ludtke as a vanguard of journalism. Because of Melissa, I know my title as a journalist comes first and my gender shouldn't matter. Please join me in introducing Melissa Ludtke.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and kind of takes us right back to where I am today, which is looking at the past, looking at my past, hoping to inform people about things today. I think history is very important in being able to help us to frame some of these issues that linger on, as you will find later in my talk. I want to thank Professor Lara Salali, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, close, and Dean Laurel Hellerstein for inviting me to be here today. I didn't know I was leading off anything. That's quite a challenge. So I'm going to start with something very old, and that is I'm going to take us back to Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I don't know about you, but I find it very refreshing when I've lived a number of years on this planet and suddenly one day I discover something I never knew before. I've sung the chorus to Take Me Out to the Ball Game at probably more games than many of you have ever attended. Covering baseball, I covered a lot of games. And I never understood, because I never heard the actual lyrics to the song, I only heard the chorus, why this song was written and who it's about. So I'm going to play a version of it from 1908. Try to listen carefully, but if you don't pick up everything, we'll get to the main point of why I'm playing this chorus for you now. So let's see if we can do it. Let's see, here we go. All right, here we go.
Take me out to the ball game, sung by Edward Meeker, Edison Raffle. Casey was baseball mad, had the fever and had it bad. Just to root for the home, out through every stew. Casey Blue. On the Saturday, her young beau called to see if she'd like to go to see and show what this case said. No, I'll tell you what you can do. Take me out to the ball.
Okay, so did anyone notice there that when this was sung, it's about a young girl who wants to go out to a ball game? I never knew that. I always thought and figured, because we always talk about fathers and sons and boys and men going to baseball games, that the most traditional game in the world, traditional song about baseball was about a guy wanting to go out to the ball yard. So when I discovered this about maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years, when I saw someone tweet it and I was fascinated to go listen to it, it's kind of fun to figure out that in fact it was about girls. So if you didn't catch the name, here are the original lyrics that were written, and it's Katie, Casey. So again, we have this overlap with Casey at the bat that would come later on. So Casey seems to be a familiar name in baseball, but Katie Casey is the girl who insisted that she didn't want to go to a show, she'd rather go to a ball game. So that's kind of fun. I I'm like Katie Casey. If you asked me whether I wanted to go to a show or a ball game when I was young, and still today probably, I'd pick the ball game. So let's see if I can play this now.
I'm thrilled about our guest this week, Melissa Ludtke, former sports reporter for Sports Illustrated, sued for access to the Yankees locker room in 1978. And that case has long been considered a watershed moment for women in sports.
Women wrote sports before I did. In 1946, Mary Garber began her 60-year career. Back then, most press boxes were off limits to women. The field and the batting cage, too. So that's why in May 1957, Doris O'Donnell had to talk to Ted Williams from the stands at Fenway Park. By September 1972, Diane Shaw was on the field and in the press box, but only after her male editor called the Red Sox to demand that she be let in. She still wasn't allowed to eat with the other sports writers. The team gave her a private picnic table. In January 1973, baseball writers tossed Sports Illustrated's baseball reporter Stephanie Salter out of their annual baseball writers' dinner. Stephanie left.
I'm thrilled about our guest this week.
Oh my God, sorry. It's supposed to be a video. So I'm going to skip it and I'm going to go on and we'll see if it can work later. So I'm going to get us to Doris and Ted in 1957. So in that year, and there are many years before Bowie Kuhn banned me from baseball locker rooms, the teams refused to give the few women reporters who showed up to cover games access to any of the places that male reporters got to go. In 1957, Doris O'Donnell's editor sent her on an Eastern road trip with the Cleveland Indians. The Red Sox writers immediately told her that she could not sit with them in the press box. Doris, who had reported from Moscow in Russia and would go on to cover the racial riots and civil rights movement, wrote with humor about her road trip for the Cleveland News. It was entitled, "Cleveland Girl Had Fun Trying to Crash the Fenway Press Box." And here's what she wrote. "Boston sports writers are sissies. They banned me from that all-male sanctuary, the Red Sox press box, because they're afraid to establish what they consider a dangerous precedent. Women reporters are by tradition here in Boston persona non grata in the press box, and no traveling female reporter from Cleveland is going to shatter that rule. The finality of the writer's decision had all the boom of a strike called by umpire Bill Summers. It was a close vote, 5-4, said Globe sports writer Bob Holbrook apologetically. And the gallant Mr. Holbrook said after the vote in a trifle lamely, "Well, we could let you in, but how about those girls on the Boston papers? They wanted to get in a long time ago." Well, Holbrook need not resign, even though the writers with long-distance views won, because I had fun trying to crash the press box. I just might add that on that trip, she also went to Washington, D.C. and to Baltimore, where writers did let her into the press box, but of course the Yankees, like the Red Sox, blocked her. Still, the press box was not the only obstacle for women back then. During batting practice and just interviews on the field where the reporters got to mingle with players, Doris O'Donnell was not allowed there, where she was confined to the grandstand seats. Still, as you see, she did get to interview Ted Williams, and he wasn't someone who talked to a lot of people. So I think he might have been intrigued by the fact that a woman was there. When she was 89 years old, she reflected on this one-time road trip she'd taken with the team, with the baseball team. She'd been thrown out of the two press boxes, told she should be home making babies, and came up with a rare one-on-one interview with Ted Williams leaning against that wall. Shortly after the return, she was subject of a front-page story in the Sporting News in which she was quoted as saying of sports writing, "I'd rather see a son of mine driving a bus." Okay, eating was another kind of thing where women had a bit of a problem fitting in. Not because they didn't want to eat before games like everyone else. It was a tradition that the home team fed the reporters before the game. So when Diane Shaw came to Fenway Park in the early 1970s, the Red Sox set up a picnic table for her on the roof with a sign designating it to be the Ladies' Pavilion. Of course, she was the only lady, and the rest of the men were eating inside. So she wrote about that experience, and I want to read her words when she talks about during the game approaching the older PR person for the Red Sox. He was rather a curmudgeonly man who I had several occasions to meet during my tenure in baseball. So, she says, during the game, Dick Bresciani, who was the younger PR person, sat between me and Bill Crowley, the older one, in the press box. I think he thought I'd make a terrible scene or something. Finally, after about 4 innings, I introduced myself to Mr. Crowley and said, see, nothing terrible has happened. He said, well, it will. And I asked him what could happen. He said, tomorrow there will be 50 girls like you here. I told him I didn't think there were 50 women sports writers in the whole country. But he said, well, maybe not, but they'll say they are, just so they can get at my players. The next night, I was allowed into the press room. Tom Yockey, the team owner, had told everybody that if I was accredited, I was to be let in. I sat all alone. Nobody came near me, but then Mr. Yockey sent word over to me to join him at his table. So that was her experience in the early 70s at Fenway Park. All right, so this is an envelope that had contained a letter that came from my grandfather, Robert S. Edwards, who lived in Milton, Massachusetts. And it was addressed to my mother 3 days after I was born. I was the oldest of 5 children in our family. So I'm going to begin with this letter because I want you to get a little sense of who this girl was who knocked on Major League Baseball's clubhouse door in the mid-70s. How did it happen that I was among the few women reporting on sports in this pioneering generation? What in my 1950s girlhood put me on such a pathway at a time when the word girls and sports rarely found their way into the same sentence? So let's start with my birth. My mom was in Iowa City, having just completed a master's degree when she gave birth to me as the first of 5 children. Her cherished Red Sox were 1,000 miles away, and they were about to play the Yankees on the day after I was born. As that series was being played, her father typed a letter of congratulations to his youngest daughter, who had during her teenage years had been his faithful companion at numerous Fenway Park games. So this is his original typed letter. I'm going to just read you a tiny bit. Very wonderful, smart girl. You in that first picture of Melissa Mary Ludtke, and he spells my name wrong, just looks like her, you just look like her, and believe me, she's grown a lot since last Sunday. That was 3 days. Okay, so we're going to the 3rd paragraph, and here's what her father writes to her in her hospital bed in Iowa City. Well, we were thinking of you, and in fact, we've been doing so ever since the event, and yesterday about 1:30 p.m. and on, we were listening to those Red Sox wang the Yanks twice in a row. What a ball game that first one was. 15 innings and some job of relief pitching by Scarborough. When the Yanks came up with those 7 runs in the 7th inning and made the score 6-10 with 2 innings to go, we thought it was about all over. And when Ted Williams hit that home run in the last of the 8th to tie it up, we thought that this time the Yanks were in for a real battle, and they were. They just couldn't get Ted to hit the ball where they ganged up on him. He's been hitting a lot to left in the last 2 weeks, and the Yankees gave up shifting for him, and then he banged him to right and center and all over the place. So that's the letter that greets my mother when I'm born. So you wonder why I had baseball in my blood. Well, it wasn't necessarily a time when if you were a girl, you could play baseball or even softball or a lot of other sports. So when I was in 7th grade, I kind of got that underground memo that if you were going to be a popular girl, then you should be a cheerleader. And so I tried out for cheerleading. I am, you can probably see me, second from the, where are you? On the left? Yeah, whatever, the blonde hair. in the front row. However, I figured things out by the 8th grade. I left cheerleading behind and joined the girls' basketball team. So instead of cheering for the boys, I was competing with girls on the court. So when I'm invited to talk with girls today, as I often am, I often pantomime what our basketball games looked like back then. They are totally unrecognizable from the way women play now. From the moment a player touched the ball, she had only 3 dribbles, and then she had to pass it. On our team, 4 or 6 players on the court were not allowed to cross the court center line. Only our 2 rovers could. Oh, I wanted to be a rover, and in time I often was. Young girls today, like many of you, find it hard to imagine that women who are alive today ever played under such antiquated rules, which were designed to protect us from too much exertion. Consequently, our games bore little resemblance to the ones that boys played. So now I'm going to read you a brief excerpt from the book that I'm working on now, Locker Room Talk, as I begin to try to delve into how girls' on-court rules were in many ways analogous to what we confronted in our daily lives growing up in the 50s and 60s. Here we go. A boy was free in ways I was not. He got to decide much more than I did, where, what, how, and when things could happen in his life. As it was on the basketball court, when a boy saw an opening, a path to the basket, he kept moving, dribbling as long as it made sense, zigzagging his way to get where he wanted to be. 3 dribbles were all I had on the court. And rules weren't the only thing holding me back. Attitudes did too. What grown-ups didn't believe we should or could do, they didn't show us ways to do. Still, I don't remember hearing me or the other girls use words like unfair to describe what was happening to us. We didn't know our lives could be different. It was just how things were. A natural order about which I had few complaints. Nor did anyone older than I seem upset that girls had to play by one set of rules and the boys by another. So I wasn't either. Okay, we're going to return to eating for a moment. And this is in 1973. I'm going to tell you about my Sports Illustrated colleague. I had not joined the magazine yet, but Stephanie Salter was the junior baseball reporter at that point. And she ended up getting a ticket to the event of the winter, which was the Baseball Writers of America annual dinner. And I'm going to read again from the book that I'm writing. On the ticket, it said it was an all-men affair. She showed up at the Sports Illustrated table, took her seat with the other 9 people at the table, and she was summarily evicted, literally almost by force. She stayed and stayed until she could stay no longer when the security officials came and took her out. As Stephanie told Steve Jacobson, a sports writer with Newsday who was at the dinner and interviewed her after she'd been forced to leave, she'd used her dinner ticket, quote, to challenge the male exclusivity. I couldn't believe no woman had tried to challenge it before, Stephanie went on to say. In the opening paragraph of his story, Steve wrote that, quote, she had fought a battle of women's liberation against the male sanctuary of the Baseball Writers Association, and she'd lost. It wasn't quite like being burned at the stake, but she promised there would be other battles. He portrayed hers as the principled stand in the long history of actions women had taken against discriminatory rules, policies, and practices that men crafted, which resulted in unfair treatment of women. Despite Steve's words about the political essence of Stephanie's action, Newsday's headline writers ignored the story's message and charged ahead with a different goal in mind. Writing the headline, "Writers Block a Damsel at the Plate," the copy editors added meat to the bones on which the paper's predominantly male commuters would gnaw while riding the train home the next afternoon. Newsday's play on words followed the customary 1970s script of delivering typical sexist trope concocted by the men populating the newsrooms in those days. This familiar dance of words, long on cuteness, largely devoid of context, was the typical pairing that greeted women who did something newsworthy that revolved around gender equality. Pun-filled headlines, as predictable as they were formulaic, were never more banal than when sports were entangled with women's rights. First rule of thumb in writing such headlines was to use words that would diminish the woman, and by association, her actions. That's why the word damsel works so well. While damsel is defined as being a young, unmarried woman, no one who hears or reads this word doesn't imagine her as being in distress, and presumably hoping to be rescued by a man. After choosing such triggering words for the headline, the effort was made to create an image in the minds of grown men and give them reason to chuckle. Newsday's headline did this by envisioning its damsel in a metaphorical collision at baseball's home plate. Readers knew instantly that this woman isn't going to fare very well. She also triggered in a number of sports columnists words like these that I'm going to read to you that from a Florida sports writer named Frank True. And remember, this is happening just 4 years before my lawsuit or my legal action to get into locker rooms. So I'm just trying to give you this as a sense of understanding the sort of territory, the attitudinal territory that we were in. Frank True, the baseball press box, no woman's land for a century or more, has become an objective of conquest, Frank True writes. So, he goes on to explain why this is so. He said, now it might be argued that the dialogue at the dinner show could be cleaned up to a point where it might be acceptable to feminine ears. But Major League press boxes, they represent an entirely different situation, inasmuch as they are not a one-night stand. But they are inhabited throughout the season by uninhibited males who refuse to relinquish their rights to express themselves in any language they see fit during the progress of a game. Yes, the girls themselves may know all these words, but when you make a co-ed chorus of it, you've created the verbal atmosphere of a brothel in a press box, haven't you? Any gal capable of writing a good sports story today deserves more respect than that accorded a wench in a hippie commune. The average baseball writer insists upon an unmixed press box for the same reason that he would not be stupid enough to take his wife or girlfriend to a stag party. Someday press boxes may be built with male and female compartments, but they better be soundproofed. Okay, I just want to assure you that the attitudes of the men in power at Sports Illustrated were not all that different than the columnists that I have just read from. The managing editor at that time refused at first to write a letter protesting the baseball writer's actions against his baseball reporter. It was only when the company's lawyers reminded him that the company had its own conciliation agreement with its women employees, which was the result of a legal action taken by women against Time Inc. several years earlier, charging gender discrimination, that he had another person draft the letter for him and sent it under his name, just simply saying that the exclusion of this professional reporter from your dinner on the sole grounds that she is a woman seems to us to be out of keeping certainly with the current mores and indeed perhaps with the law. So he was pulled into that rather reluctantly. All right, now we're getting a little closer to 1977. So here I am. Well, you don't see me there, but I'm actually at Kaminsky Park with Bill Veeck and with Roger Kahn. So I'm going to read to you briefly about this trip. Roger Kahn, of course, was the author of the best-selling book, The Boys of Summer, about the 1955 Dodgers. And he had been asked by our outside editor to do a 3-part series on sort of the older guys in baseball, like Bill Veeck, who had been around the sport for quite some time. So in a book he wrote in 2003, I learned of a conversation I'd never known about before that he had with an editor at Sports Illustrated as they decided to send me along as his reporter. So here's what he writes. One of Sports Illustrated's male editors suggested that their best staff baseball researcher, Melissa Ludtke, travel with me. Undertaking on-scene baseball reporting still was new for women, not only at Time Inc., but everywhere. I said thanks, and the editor, well, trying the sort of humor one seldom hears today, 2003, said, quote, "Take her for the whole trip. You can do anything you want with her, just so long as you return her in 2 weeks." Roger Kahn writes after that, not knowing how to respond, I chose silence. So Roger and I set out for Chicago. It was our first stop on this 2-week reporting trip. We get to the stadium, and he's going to go up and meet Bill Veeck and come to the press box, and he asked me to kind of go and get the press pass. So I'm going to read again from his book, October Men. At the press gate, Melissa picked up credentials, good for the press box and the field. Mine covered the press box, the field, and the clubhouse. Upstairs, I sat beside Bill Veeck, who was chain-smoking mentholated cigarettes. Melissa parked herself in the second row of the press box and quietly kept score. Some of the old-line baseball writers variously stared and oogled. One writer came up to me and said intensely into my ear, quote, "Your girlfriend doesn't belong here. You know that. What do you think this is? Ladies' night at the Turkish bath?" Roger never told me that while we were on the trip. I only had to read it later. Okay, so after the game, the deal is that Roger and Bill and I are going to sit at the Bard's Room, which is inside Kaminsky Park. It's where the writers go after they file their stories. And Roger and Bill are going to, drink their alcohol, and I'm going to have my spritzer and take notes on what these men say to each other. So here's where Roger picks up the thread with the Bard's Room. A few sports writers glared at her, meaning me, and then at me. And though I knew some of them, no one offered even a nod or even a friendly look. It was as though I had brought a harlot into the temple. We stood quietly waiting for Bill Veeck, but after the bartender motioned me aside, he whispered, "Sir, your secretary will have to drink outside in the hall." I snapped. "She's not my secretary. She's a reporter, and if she has to drink in the hall, I will drink there too." The old bartender, small, white-haired, docile and black, suddenly looked miserable. "I don't make the rules, sir. I'm only telling you what I've been told to tell you." "Come on, Melissa," Roger commanded. "We'll drink Mr. Veeck's whiskey in the hallway." Here's where I pick up the story and writing about it in my book. We never met up with Bill that night, and though I remember Roger walking quickly out of the Bard's Room as I trailed behind, exactly why we were in the hallway he didn't say at the time. Not that I needed his explanation to have a pretty good idea of what had just happened. The next morning, Roger telephoned Bill, who informed him that it was the baseball writers, not he, who controlled the Bard's Room. "They could even throw me out if they wanted to," he joked. "Come on, Bill," Roger said. "Don't you make me go to war over this." After the next night game, I sat in the Bard's Room at a table with Bill and Roger. Hanging on the words of this legendary owner and scribe, I scribbled furiously to keep pace with the talking around me. As the evening went on and more drinks were poured, what I was seeing and hearing was the boys that lived inside of these men, both of whom seemed quite old to me. At one point that evening, Bill glanced over at me and said, "The most beautiful thing in the world is a major league ballpark full of people." Did I, he asked, agree? I told him I most certainly did. In 1978, after the decision in my case came down, Bill Veeck was asked to comment on women in locker rooms, and he said this: "Would I allow a woman in the clubhouse? Of course not. Would I allow a woman to watch me go to the bathroom?" Okay. In 1976, the Yankees took a vote. It was a vote to admit women into their locker room. I never knew about this vote. I was covering the Yankees in 1976, and no one else did. It was never written about. And we wouldn't have learned about it unless we filed our lawsuit. And in the discovery phase of our lawsuit, we got the memos that related to our lawsuit from baseball commissioner's office. And in that, we learned about the vote the Yankees had taken, and then we learned about Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner who would later ban me, saying he was worried about the slippery slope effect that if the Yankees did this, other teams would follow. And they quickly let the Yankees know that this was not going to happen. And as everyone knows, the Commissioner of Baseball acts in the best interests of baseball and has total authority. It is as though he is a king. The Yankees took it back before anyone knew that the vote had even taken place. So now I'm going to take you to the night of October 11th, 1977 at Yankee Stadium, when the Commissioner of Baseball, Bowie Kuhn, banned me from both teams' locker rooms and all other baseball teams forever. I'm going to pick it up when I'm called up to the press box in the 5th inning. I'm sitting in the auxiliary press box downstairs in the stands, and they call me up. And I end up talking with Bob Weirs, who's the commissioner's media director and the person who had sent him this memo that I referred to about the Yankees. That night, I pulled my press credential from underneath my jacket to display it to Bob Weirs, the commissioner's media director. I wanted him to see what was written below my name. Good for admission and clubhouse, general admission and clubhouse. I told him the Los Angeles Dodgers had taken a vote after I'd let the team's player rep, pitcher Tommy John, know that I might be in the team's locker room during the World Series. I'd done that as a courtesy, since I know no woman reported on the Dodgers. If I showed up, I didn't want to surprise the players. After the team had met to talk about my access, a majority of players agreed that I had the right to report inside the locker room before and after games, just as the male reporters did. The Baseball Writers Association had given me this press credential. The Dodgers had voted they're okay, and I knew the Yankees were okay, since the team's PR person had given me a locker room pass at the end of the season. I'd already been reporting inside the team's locker room during the American League Championship Series. I asked Bob Weirs to tell me why the commissioner was taking this permission away. It was then that he uttered words that I have never forgotten. It's not that we're rescinding permission, he told me in a snarky tone, reminding me of a 3rd grade teacher reiterating rules for her most problematic child. But this time he emphasized the word permission in telling me permission was never granted. As he did this, he expended not 1 ounce of empathy. To my ears, he was relishing this assignment, at last being able to put into play a keep the ladies out policy that he and the commissioner had long hankered for an opportunity to launch. Of all baseball's commandments, he made clear that only one mattered. The commissioner alone commands baseball. He giveth permission, and when necessary, he taketh away. This is what he'd done with mine, and in the silence that hovered around us, Weir stamped this decision as irrevocable. It was clear to me that there was nobody to whom I could appeal. I refused to let myself cry in front of him, though I suspected he thought I would. But since he didn't know me, he didn't realize all the practice I'd had in reining in my emotions when I was at the ballpark. Frustrations I swallowed, anger I withheld, insults I heard, and I absorbed. I'd lost count of the times when I'd been close to tears and steeled myself so as to hold them back. To cry is what the men's eyes watching me wanted me to do, and I refused to give them this satisfaction. Forcing tears back was second nature to me now, so after a few seconds and a gulp, my steely resolve returned. So why am I being kept out, I asked Weirs. A woman has no place in a locker room, he replied. He said this so flatly that his opinions seemed like fact, though somehow I knew it wasn't. He assured me that baseball was not ready for a woman to be among its players in the locker room, simply sidestepping what both of us knew was already happening in the NBA and the NHL. For 2 years, women had been reporting in locker rooms alongside the men. And in baseball's off-season, I'd been in the NBA locker rooms too. But in choosing to avoid mention of this inconvenient truth, it's likely that he felt I was owed no explanation of what set baseball apart. Though I was staring right at him, he avoided making eye contact with me. But I wasn't going anywhere until I got him to tell me the reasons behind this decision. My silence and stubbornness proved too much, and finally Weir spoke. Well, we haven't consulted the players' wives. They might object to you going in the locker room, he told me. His response shocked me. Its logic befuddled me. I asked him to name another media issue on which the commissioner's office had consulted with players' wives, but he couldn't. So instead, he gave me a second reason. If I were to go into locker rooms tonight, then the classmates of the players' children would ridicule them in school the next day. I was incredulous. I couldn't find words with which to respond. Had I been asked to name reasons, well, maybe the first one, but never the second would have come to mind. I did recall that when the New York Rangers' wives complained about women being in the locker room, the team had temporarily kept the women reporters out, but soon they were back in doing their jobs. Weir's, whose job was to be on the lookout for such accounts, had likely imprinted that one into his mind. But he surely knew that soon women reporters were again working inside the Rangers' locker room, and the NHL was pushing more teams to institute equal access policies. His second reason puzzled me more. How exactly would these classmates find out that I had been in the locker room? What would the players' children be ridiculed for doing? I was baffled. For an instant, I considered asking Bob to explain, but I realized we'd hit an impasse. There was nothing left for either of us to say, and so rhetorically I mused, then it's because of my sex? Yes, Bob replied. I hadn't expected him to answer. This is a picture of Billy Martin and Mickey Morabito, and the reason I want to show you this is because I mentioned that in 1977, I had gone into the Yankees locker room toward the end of the season and covered them in the American League Championships. It was because of this man, Mickey Morabito, who's over the shoulder of Billy Martin. Billy Martin and Mickey were very, very close. So Mickey was my age, and he understood the challenges I was having. I never griped out loud, but I would often share with him my frustrations during those seasons. And after the All-Star break in 1977, he came up with a scheme. And here it was. These are, for example, this is my Yankee clubhouse pass that he eventually gives me on the last 2 games of the season. And this is my World Series credential where you can see that it shows that I have access to the clubhouse. But Mickey came up with an idea, and he approached me one day. He said, how would you like to do this? He said, I think we can give you some more access here. He said, I'll tell you what. Why don't you meet me in the passageway, the side door, rather than the front door of the locker room where the guards were. The manager's office had there's a side passageway in, and there's a door that goes right into the manager's office before you get to the locker room. So he basically said, let's bring you in. He said, I'll go in the front door, you meet me at the side door, I'll unlock it, I'll bring you into Billy's office, and you can sit there and have those conversations with Billy after the game, and you'll hear the reporters asking the questions based on what's gone on in the locker room. And I was really grateful. I wasn't pushing for more, but I thought, okay, let's do it. So here I want to show you the locker room. These were things that we presented in the case in the hearing. But you'll see the Yankees locker room is pointed out here, and you'll see where I have showers and toilets here. So that shower and toilet area, as you can see, these were absolutely prohibited from any reporter, male or female, going in. So the whole canard that there were going to be women watching men take showers and in the toilet area was preposterous on the face of it. Not any man, not any woman went in there. So any reporter coming out of that shower area into the locker room could come out in any way they chose to. This is just kind of a fun picture. This is Mark Fidrich, who was known as the Bird. We put him on the cover of the magazine. He was a player in Detroit, and I spent a lot of time with him and was told to babysit him when he came to New York to do the cover story, so that's when we took the picture together. But the reason I'm reading this is because I often had to go to Detroit when we were going up to this, this cover story, and one of the writers wrote something about me when I made an appearance there, which gives you a sense of how people saw me. It was called Hell Hath No Fury, Gal Throws Baseball a Curve. And it was written in January 1978 before the decision. He says, I don't know just when I began to fear women in general, and Melissa Ludtke in particular. But I think it was the day she sat rather cozily on the Tigers bench and wiggled her little finger at Mark the Bird Fidrich. I don't think so. But, the bird zipped into the dugout like a homing pigeon, and there just wasn't enough he could tell Miss Ludtke, who cooed one question after another at him. There's some people in this room who know me quite well. I don't think I've ever cooed. Okay, now this occurred on a day when Fidrich was playing hard to get with the gentlemen of the press, as had been his wont on occasion ever since he found out about that the nation adored him. Miss Ludtke, who's a top-flight writer for Sports Illustrated, also sashayed around some of the other Tigers, asking pertinent little questions. The answers were woven into a fine story, I'm sure. I can only wonder if the highly reputable Melissa accepted any various invitations, mostly for drinking and carousing, from the Tigers. How can I compete with that? I ruthfully asked Tiger manager Ralph Houck, as Melissa's super silhouette faded into the sunset, and I feared the neon lights. Well, I'll tell you one thing, Houck responded. She does her homework, and she's one woman reporter who seems to know what she's talking about. Houck praising any reporter, especially a distaff writer, is unusual, if not unique. In his concluding paragraph, he wrote, well, I don't know how Melissa's suit will fare, but I have an idea that she's going to get into the Yankee locker room and probably others across the land. Well, the writer was right. I did get into the Yankees locker room, and more importantly, thousands of women who have come into sports writing and sports broadcasting since 1977 have had equal access as well. And how are we doing on time? 5 minutes. Okay, I have one video I really want to play. But access is not equated to acceptance, and for every step women take forward, we're feeling the pushback from mainly men. And no arena of social criticism is filled with more misogynistic diatribes against our presence than social media. So let me see if this video will work, and I think that's what I will try to leave you with. Let's see. One sec. Okay. I had it lined up, but okay. Okay, this is a 4-minute video, so it should work here. Here we go.
I'd like to start a petition for a ban on all links to Julie DeCaro's Twitter feed.
Okay.
All right, you ready to do some mean tweets?
I'm ready.
Sarah Spain sounds like a nagging wife on TV today.
Not even married yet.
Julie DeCaro is a run-of-the-mill, mediocre beat writer.
Not atrocious, not good, just sort of there.
I'm actually not a beat writer at all, but okay.
Sarah Spain is just a scrub muffin? I don't even know what a scrub muffin is.
I don't either.
I love muffins.
One of the players should beat you to death with their hockey stick, like before you are.
I'm just reading this.
Okay.
I mean, okay, this is why we don't hire any females unless we need our sucked or our food cooked.
Sarah Spain is a self-important know-it-all. Okay.
Just read the tweets, man. There's some mean tweets. This dumb.
There's a lot of C word.
There's a lot of
in-
words,
in
yeah.
here. Yeah. I hope your dog gets hit by a car. You
Hopefully this skank Julie DeCaro is Bill Cosby's next victim. That would be classic.
I don't know what to say to that.
I don't. Mm. I think I can say that.
I hope your boyfriend beats you. I'm sorry.
Why bring up your own rape in the story? Is it your way of firing back at critics who said you can't get any?
That's something, huh?
Sorry.
Okay. So I have to read all of them, right? Because I mean,
Read them, I guess.
I hope you get raped again.
Oh.
I'm having trouble looking at you when I'm saying these things. Sarah Spain is a I would hate. Okay.
You need to be hit in the head with a hockey puck and killed. That's it.
Okay, if you can turn the lights on for 1 sec, in case you think that this is only
Sorry.
for people who are
Directed already.
active.
I'm sorry, on behalf of other
Okay,
people
let's get
everywhere
this off.
that you've had to deal with this.
I feel like I need to apologize to my mother, but
Okay. In case you think it's only for people who are active in the business, here's the words I received on my blog yesterday about a story I had posted about women in sports writing. Here's a little perspective for you. Erin Andrews feels totally entitled to go into locker rooms while men are changing and showering, talk to everybody about naked men, even though they say they are just there to get an interview. Then she goes off the rails when someone invades her privacy and puts it on the internet, i.e., looking through her keyhole, taping her naked in her hotel room, and putting it on the internet. This man, to my blog, says poetic justice. So, lest you think it's only for people who are actively pursuing this as a field, let me assure you that it is not. I still live in this arena too, and this is now 40 years after my lawsuit gave us access. I've always said that the law is easier to change than attitudes. So that's what I'll leave you with. Your job in this next generation is try to work on those attitudes. So thank you very much.